The mud came alive during the flash flood, and Natalie Garrison knew she had mere seconds before it dragged her under completely. She had been crossing what should have been a dry creek bed on the outskirts of Apache Junction, Arizona, carrying supplies back to her father's struggling ranch when the wall of brown water and debris hit her from the side. Now her legs were buried to the knees in thick, churning mud that pulled at her like quicksand, each surge of water threatening to sweep her off her feet entirely. Her canvas bag had already been torn from her grip, disappearing into the roiling current. She tried to pull one leg free, but the suction only increased, and panic seized her chest as another wave knocked her forward. Her hands clawed at the muddy bank, finding no purchase on the slick surface. "Hold on." The shout came from somewhere above her, and then suddenly a man was there, sliding down the embankment with reckless speed. He was tall and lean, with dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, his blue eyes fierce with determination. Before Natalie could even respond, he grabbed both her arms just below the elbows, his grip strong and sure. "I have got you. Do not let go." The mud pulled harder, as if angry at being denied its prize. Natalie felt herself sliding deeper, the current now up to her thighs. She looked up at the stranger, seeing the strain in his face as he braced himself against a rocky outcropping, his boots digging into the muddy slope. His fingers pressed into her arms with desperate strength. "I cannot hold on much longer," she gasped, feeling her body being wrenched downward. "Yes, you can," he said through gritted teeth. "Look at me. Look at me, not the water." She locked eyes with him, seeing something in his gaze that steadied her even as the world seemed to be falling apart around them. Rain poured down in sheets, thunder cracking overhead, but his hands never loosened their grip. He pulled, muscles straining, and she felt herself move an inch upward through the sucking mud. "When I count to 3, kick your legs as hard as you can," he commanded. 1, 2, 3. Natalie kicked with everything she had, and at the same moment, the cowboy hauled backward with such force that they both went tumbling up the embankment when her legs finally broke free from the mud's grasp. They rolled together through the wet grass and rocks until they came to rest several feet from the edge, both breathing hard. The roar of the flood filled the air as the creek bed, dry just an hour ago, became a raging torrent. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Natalie lay on her back, chest heaving, covered head to toe in mud. Beside her, the stranger pushed himself up on his elbows, looking down at her with concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She took inventory of herself. Her arms ached where he had gripped her, and she would have bruises, but nothing felt broken. "I do not think so. You saved my life." "Could not very well let you get carried off," he said, a hint of warmth entering his voice despite the circumstances. "Gabriel Vance. Most people call me Gabe." "Natalie Garrison." She tried to sit up, and he immediately offered his hand to help her. Even through the mud and rain, she noticed the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. "My father owns the Garrison Ranch about 2 miles east of here." Recognition flickered across Gabe's face. "I know it. I have been working at the Patterson spread since last month, just came down from Colorado." He looked at the raging water, then back at her. "You should not have been out in this. The sky has been threatening storms all morning." "It was clear when I left town," Natalie defended herself, then sighed. "You are right, though. I should have turned back when I saw the clouds building. I just needed to get these supplies home." She looked around for her bag, but it was long gone, swallowed by the flood. All that money wasted. "Better wasted than you drowned," Gabe said firmly. He stood, offering her his hand again. "Come on. My horse is tied up in that grove of mesquite trees. I will take you home." Natalie accepted his help, her legs shaking as she got to her feet. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her cold despite the warm August afternoon. Gabe noticed her trembling and immediately shrugged out of his duster, draping it around her shoulders. It was damp but still held his warmth, and it smelled like leather and sage. "I am already soaked," he said when she started to protest. "Besides, I am used to worse weather than this." They made their way to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding who nickered softly at their approach. Gabe mounted first, then pulled Natalie up behind him with an ease that suggested he was well accustomed to ranch work. She hesitated only a moment before wrapping her arms around his waist, feeling the solid strength of him through his wet shirt. The ride to the Garrison ranch took nearly 40 minutes in the driving rain. Natalie directed him along the safest route, avoiding the washes and low areas that might have flooded. She found herself acutely aware of every point where her body pressed against his back, the way his muscles shifted as he guided the horse, the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was improper, certainly, but these were extraordinary circumstances. And besides, she reasoned, he had just saved her life. Normal rules of propriety seemed less important after that. "There," she said finally, pointing to the cluster of buildings that made up her family's ranch. It was smaller than she would have liked, more worn around the edges than it had been when her mother was alive. The main house needed a new coat of paint, and one of the barn doors hung slightly crooked. But it was home, and she felt a rush of relief at seeing it. Her father, Nathan Garrison, emerged from the barn as they rode up, his weathered face creasing with worry when he saw his daughter's muddy condition. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with gray threading through his brown hair and the perpetual squint of someone who had spent decades under the Arizona sun. "Natalie, what happened?" "Flash flood caught her at Coyote Creek," Gabe explained, dismounting and then helping Natalie down. "She got stuck in the mud. Barely pulled her out in time." Nathan's face went pale. He pulled his daughter into a fierce hug, not caring about the mud. "Thank God you are all right, and thank you, young man. I do not know what I would do if—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Gabriel Vance, sir," Gabe introduced himself. "Working at the Patterson place." "Patterson's?" Nathan's expression shifted slightly, something unreadable passing through his eyes. "Well, regardless of where you work, you have my deepest gratitude. Please come inside. It is the least I can do to offer you a hot meal and a chance to dry off." Natalie caught the odd note in her father's voice when he mentioned the Patterson ranch, but she was too cold and exhausted to puzzle over it. She followed the men into the house, acutely aware that she was dripping mud all over the floor her mother had once kept spotless. "Let me get you some dry clothes," Nathan said to Gabe. "And Natalie, go change. I will heat up some stew." In her small bedroom, Natalie peeled off her sodden, muddy dress and undergarments, her fingers clumsy with cold. She scrubbed herself down with a cloth and basin of water, watching the water turn brown. Her arms bore the clear imprints of Gabe's fingers, purple bruises already forming. She traced them gently, remembering the desperation in his face as he had held on, refusing to let the flood take her. She had never seen anyone look at her quite like that before, as if her survival was the only thing that mattered in the world. Most of the young men in Apache Junction treated her pleasantly enough, but there was always a certain distance in their eyes. She was Nathan Garrison's daughter, and the Garrison ranch was failing. She had no dowry to speak of, no prospects. Her father worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep the place running with just the two of them, and one hired hand who was too old for the heavy work anymore. Natalie pulled on a clean dress, simple calico in a soft blue that had been her mother's favorite color. She brushed out her long dark hair, still damp, and braided it loosely. When she looked in the small mirror above her dresser, she saw that her cheeks were flushed, her green eyes unusually bright. She told herself it was just the aftermath of her near drowning, nothing more. When she emerged, Gabe had changed into some of her father's old clothes. They were slightly too short in the arms and legs, but they were dry. He had washed the mud from his face and hands, and Natalie found herself noticing details she had missed in the chaos of the flood. He had a strong jaw, a straight nose that looked like it might have been broken once, and a mouth that seemed naturally inclined toward smiling, though he was serious now as he sat at their kitchen table talking with her father. "The situation is worse than I thought," Nathan was saying as Natalie entered. Both men stood, and Gabe's eyes met hers for a brief moment before he looked away, a faint color rising in his cheeks. "What situation?" Natalie asked, sitting down across from Gabe while her father ladled stew into bowls. Nathan sighed heavily. "I was just telling Mr. Vance about our troubles with the Patterson Ranch. William Patterson has been trying to buy our land for the past year. He keeps offering less and less, waiting for us to get desperate enough to accept." "Why would he do that?" Gabe asked, his brow furrowing. "Your land is good grazing. It has the best water rights in this part of the county," Nathan explained. "Our wells never run dry, even in the worst droughts. Patterson wants to control the water supply. If he owns our land, every other small rancher in the area would have to negotiate with him for access during dry spells." Natalie had heard versions of this conversation many times over the past year, but hearing it explained to Gabe made it feel more real somehow, more urgent. "We have been managing," she said quietly. "Barely. Our hired hand, old Pete, is 73 years old," Nathan continued. "He does what he can, but the heavy work falls to me, and I am not getting any younger. Natalie helps where she can, but this is no life for a young woman, working herself ragged just to keep us afloat." "Papa," Natalie protested, embarrassed to have her circumstances laid out so plainly in front of a stranger, even one who had saved her life. Gabe was quiet for a moment, stirring his stew without eating. Finally, he looked up at Nathan. "What if you had another hand? Someone young and strong, good with horses and cattle." "I cannot afford to hire anyone else," Nathan said bluntly. "I can barely afford to keep old Pete on, and I would not let him go even if I could. He was my father's best friend." "I am not asking for wages," Gabe said. The words hung in the air. Natalie stared at him. "What? Room and board would be enough," Gabe continued, his voice steady. "I have saved most of my pay from the Patterson Ranch. I do not need much." "Why would you do that?" Nathan asked, voicing the question Natalie was thinking. "You do not know us. Why would you leave a paying job to work for nothing?" Gabe's jaw tightened. "Because William Patterson is not the man I thought he was when I took the job. I have seen how he conducts his business, how he treats the smaller ranchers. He sent me into town last week to deliver a message to the bank manager about calling in the Hendersons' loan early. The Hendersons have 3 young children." He looked directly at Nathan. "I do not want to be part of driving good people off their land." "That still does not explain why you would work for free," Natalie said, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. In her experience, nobody did anything for nothing. There was always an angle, always something they wanted. Gabe turned to look at her, and she felt the intensity of his gaze like a physical touch. "Maybe I believe some things are more important than money. Maybe I think fighting alongside people who actually deserve to keep their land means something." He paused. "Or maybe I just cannot stand the thought of walking away and hearing in a few months that Natalie Garrison drowned in a flood because her father was too worn down to keep an eye on her. Or that Nathan Garrison worked himself to death trying to save his ranch alone." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain drumming on the roof, softer now as the storm moved off to the east. Natalie felt her face flush again, but not from cold this time. There was something in the way he had said her name, something that made her pulse quicken. Nathan cleared his throat. "That is a generous offer, Mr. Vance. Too generous, but I do not feel right accepting charity." "It is not charity," Gabe said firmly. "It is a choice. My choice. And honestly, sir, if you turn me down, I will probably just quit Patterson's anyway and look for work somewhere else in the territory. At least here I know the work would be going towards something worthwhile." Natalie could see her father wavering. She knew how badly they needed help, how she had watched him move more slowly each morning, his joints stiff from too many years of hard labor. She knew that old Pete was held together mostly by stubbornness and refused to admit when tasks were beyond his capability. And she knew that she herself was exhausted from trying to do the work of 3 people, keeping the house and the books and still finding time to help with the animals. "All right," Nathan said finally. "A trial period. 1 month. If you still feel the same way after that, we will discuss a more permanent arrangement, and I will pay you what I can, even if it is not much." Gabe smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "That is fair." They shook hands across the table, and Natalie felt something shift in her chest. This stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, who had pulled her from the flooding creek with his bare hands and refused to let go, was now going to be part of their daily lives. The thought should have made her nervous. Instead, she felt the first stirring of something she had not felt in a long time: hope. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having scrubbed the sky clean. Natalie woke early as always, the habit too ingrained to break even after the previous day's trauma. Her body ached in places she had not known could ache, and the bruises on her arms had darkened to deep purple overnight. She dressed carefully, choosing a work dress with long sleeves that would hide the marks. When she entered the kitchen, she found Gabe already there, sitting at the table with her father and old Pete, discussing the day's work over coffee. He stood immediately when he saw her, and she noticed that he had retrieved his own clothes from where they had been hung to dry overnight. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," she admitted, pouring herself coffee, "but alive thanks to you." Old Pete, a wiry man with a face like weathered leather and sharp blue eyes, grinned at her. "Heard about your adventure yesterday, miss. Glad to see you are still with us, and glad to meet the young fellow with enough sense to be in the right place at the right time." He extended a gnarled hand to Gabe. "Pete Walker. Folks just call me Old Pete, though I am not that old." "Pleasure to meet you, sir," Gabe said, shaking his hand. "Pete, stop terrorizing the young man and finish your breakfast," Nathan said, but there was warmth in his voice. He turned to Gabe. "I thought we would start by checking the fences in the north pasture. The storm probably brought down some posts. Then we need to move the cattle to higher ground in case we get more rain." "Sounds good," Gabe agreed. He glanced at Natalie. "Will you be all right here?" There was genuine concern in his question, and Natalie felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. "I will be fine. I have laundry to catch up on and accounts to review, exciting ranch business." "The accounts are just as important as the fences," Nathan said firmly. "Your mother always said the books could make or break a ranch faster than any drought." Natalie smiled at the mention of her mother, though it brought the usual pang of loss. Catherine Garrison had died 3 years ago from a fever that swept through Apache Junction, taking a dozen souls before it burned itself out. She had been the heart of this ranch, the one who kept everything running smoothly while Nathan worked the land. Natalie had tried her best to fill that role, but some days she felt like she was just play-acting at being her mother, never quite measuring up. The men headed out after breakfast, and Natalie set to work on her own tasks. but she found her attention drifting to the window, watching Gabe move around the yard as he learned the layout of the ranch. He moved with an easy confidence, the kind that came from a lifetime of physical work. She noticed how he stopped to check a loose board on the corral fence without being asked, how he spoke gently to the horses as he passed. Over the next week, a routine established itself. Gabe proved to be everything he had claimed and more. He worked from dawn until dusk without complaint, tackling whatever task Nathan set before him. He could mend fences, shoe horses, repair tack, and handle the cattle with the skill of someone who had grown up in this life. More than that, he seemed to anticipate problems before they became serious, fixing small issues before they could grow into larger ones. But it was the small moments that Natalie found herself noticing most. The way he always thanked her for meals, even simple ones. How he carved a new handle for the water pump when the old one cracked, taking time to sand it smooth so it would not give her splinters. The morning she came out to find he had already started a fire in the stove so the kitchen would be warm when she began cooking breakfast. "He is a good man," old Pete said one afternoon, finding her watching Gabe work with one of the younger horses in the corral. "Been a long time since I have seen someone put that much care into their work when they did not have to." Natalie felt her cheeks warm at being caught staring. "He certainly works hard." "That is not what I meant," Pete said, his eyes twinkling. "I meant he cares about doing right by your father and by you." He patted her shoulder with one weathered hand. "Your mama would have liked him, I think." The comment stayed with Natalie long after Pete had shuffled off to his own tasks. Would her mother have liked Gabe? Catherine Garrison had been particular about character, less interested in a person's circumstances than in the content of their heart. She would have liked that Gabe had chosen to help them when he had nothing to gain by it. She would have liked his quiet competence, the way he treated everyone with respect regardless of their station. That evening, after the supper dishes were washed and Nathan and old Pete had retired to their respective rooms, Natalie found Gabe sitting on the porch steps, looking out at the star-filled sky. The moon was nearly full, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. He glanced up, surprise crossing his face before he smiled. "Of course not. It is your porch." She sat down beside him, leaving a respectable distance between them but close enough that she could smell the clean scent of the soap he had used to wash up after the day's work. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke, just sat in comfortable silence listening to the crickets and the distant call of a coyote. "Why did you really come here?" Natalie asked finally. "The truth, not the speech you gave my father." Gabe was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I told your father the truth, but you are right that it was not the whole truth." He looked at her directly, his eyes dark in the moonlight. "When I pulled you out of that flood, and I was holding on to you, and the mud was trying so hard to take you under, I remember thinking that if I let go, I would never forgive myself. Not just because someone would have died, but because it would have been you specifically. And I did not even know you yet." Natalie's breath caught. "I do not understand." "Neither do I, really," he admitted. "But after we got you home safe, after I rode back to Patterson's ranch that night, all I could think about was that you were still here, still in danger. Not from floods maybe, but from being worked to exhaustion, from your father losing everything he has built. And I realized I could not just walk away and let that happen if there was anything I could do to help. So you decided to sacrifice your wages and work yourself to exhaustion instead." Natalie asked, trying to keep her tone light even as her heart raced. "I would not call it a sacrifice," Gabe said quietly. "These past days, working with your father and Pete, seeing how you all take care of each other in this land, It has felt more like coming home than anywhere I have been since I left Colorado." "Why did you leave Colorado?" His jaw tightened. "My father and I did not see eye to eye on some things. Important things. He wanted me to take over the family ranch, to run it the way he always had, which meant squeezing every penny out of the land and the people who worked it. I wanted to try different methods, more sustainable ones. We fought about it for years until finally I realized he was never going to change his mind, and I was never going to become the man he wanted me to be. So I left." "That must have been hard," Natalie said softly. "It was necessary," Gabe replied. "Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing." He turned to look at her again. "What about you? You must have had opportunities to leave to make a life somewhere else. Why stay and work yourself to the bone trying to save a failing ranch?" "Because it is not just a ranch," Natalie said, surprised by the passion in her own voice. "It is my parents' dream, their legacy. My father met my mother at a dance in town when he was just a hand working for someone else. He promised her he would build something of his own, something they could pass down to their children. It took them 10 years to save enough to buy this land, and another 5 before they could afford to build the house. Every fence post, every tree they planted, it was all done with their own hands and so much love." She looked down at her own hands, work-roughened and calloused. "When my mother got sick, she made me promise to take care of my father, to help him hold onto this place no matter what. I cannot break that promise." "You will not have to," Gabe said firmly. "We are going to save this ranch." The confidence in his voice made Natalie want to believe him, even though the practical part of her mind whispered that it might already be too late. They were behind on their mortgage payment, had lost 2 buyers for their cattle when Patterson had spread rumors about their stock being diseased, and the bank manager had stopped meeting her father's eyes when they passed on the street. But sitting there on the porch with Gabe, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, Natalie allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could work out after all. The days blended into weeks, and August gave way to September. The work was hard but satisfying, and slowly, the ranch began to show the effects of having adequate help. Fences that had been held together with hope and wire were properly mended. The barn door was rehung straight. The cattle, now in better pastures with more attention, started to put on healthy weight. But more than the physical improvements, Natalie noticed a change in her father. Nathan Garrison stood straighter, smiled more easily, laughed at old Pete's terrible jokes instead of just offering a tired grimace. Having Gabe there had lifted a burden from his shoulders, and with it, years seemed to fall away, and Natalie herself felt different. She caught herself humming while she worked, looking forward to mealtimes when they would all gather around the table and share stories. Gabe had a gift for drawing people out, getting old Pete to tell tales of his younger days, coaxing Nathan to share memories of Natalie's mother. And when Gabe's eyes met hers across the table, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. It was old Pete who first voiced what everyone else was carefully not saying. He cornered Natalie one morning while she was hanging laundry, his expression unusually serious. "You fancy that boy," he said without preamble. Natalie fumbled the sheet she was hanging, nearly dropping it in the dirt. "Pete, do not bother denying it. I have got eyes, and I have been watching you watch him for weeks now." He held up a hand before she could protest. "I am not saying it is a bad thing. He fancies you too, if you had not noticed." "He does not," Natalie said, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Child, I am 73 years old. I have seen more courtships than you have had hot dinners. That boy lights up like a struck match every time you enter a room. And the way he is always finding excuses to be wherever you are, fixing things you do not need fixed, asking if you need help with things he knows perfectly well you can do yourself. Pete shook his head, smiling. He has got it bad. Natalie felt her heart flutter. Even if that were true, it would not matter. We are too different. He is educated from a wealthy family in Colorado. I am just a ranch girl with no prospects. Now you are just being foolish, Pete said sternly. That boy left wealth and education behind because it was not enough. He is looking for something real, something that matters, and he found it here with us, with you. He picked up his end of the sheet, helping her hang it. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Natalie did not have an answer for him, but the conversation stayed with her all day. She found herself hyper-aware of Gabe's presence, noticing all the small things Pete had mentioned. The way his face brightened when she brought lunch out to the fields. How he always seemed to position himself between her and anything potentially dangerous. The morning she had mentioned the pump handle was sticking, and he had it fixed before she even finished her coffee. That evening, Nathan asked her to ride out with him to check on a section of fence near their eastern boundary. It was unusual for him to ask her along for such a simple task, and Natalie wondered if he had an ulterior motive. Her suspicions were confirmed when they reached the fence and found it perfectly intact. There is nothing wrong with this fence, she observed. No, her father agreed. He dismounted and leaned against the rail, looking out over the land that rolled away toward the distant mountains. I wanted to talk to you somewhere Pete could not eavesdrop and Gabe could not interrupt. Natalie dismounted as well, joining him at the fence. About what? About the fact that you and Gabriel Vance are dancing around each other like awkward teenagers, and it is driving old Pete crazy. Nathan's tone was light, but when Natalie looked at him, his expression was serious. Also, it is driving me a little crazy. Papa, nothing is happening between Gabe and me, Natalie protested. I know, Nathan said. That is what is driving me crazy. Something should be happening. Natalie stared at her father, shocked. You cannot be serious. Why not? Nathan turned to face her fully. He is a good man, hardworking, honest kind. He treats you with respect. He has proven himself over and over these past weeks. And unless I am completely blind, you care about him, and he cares about you. But we have only known him for a few weeks, Natalie said, grasping for objections. And he is only here temporarily until we get back on our feet. Natalie, your mother and I knew we wanted to marry each other after 3 weeks, Nathan said gently. And as for him being here temporarily, I think that is up to him and to you. I have seen the way he looks at this place, at our life here. He is not looking for a place to pass through. He is looking for somewhere to belong. What if I am reading things wrong? Natalie asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if he is just being kind because we gave him a place to stay? What if I say something and ruin everything and then he leaves and we lose the best help we have ever had? Nathan put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. What if you say nothing and in 6 months or a year he decides to move on because he thinks you do not want him here? What if you both spend the rest of your lives wondering what might have been? He squeezed her gently. I know you are scared. Love is terrifying, but your mother taught me that the things worth having are worth risking everything for. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, Nathan's words echoing in Natalie's mind. That night, she lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. The creak of wood cooling, the soft sounds of the horses in the barn, the rustle of wind through the mesquite trees. Somewhere in this house, Gabe was sleeping in the small room off the kitchen that had once been a pantry. They had cleared it out and made it into a bedroom, barely big enough for a narrow bed and a trunk, but Gabe had seemed genuinely pleased to have the space. She wondered if he was awake too, if he was thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. The next morning was Sunday, which meant lighter chores and, weather permitting, a trip into Apache Junction for church services. Natalie took extra care with her appearance, choosing her best dress, a deep green cotton that her mother had helped her make 2 summers before she died. It had lace at the collar and cuffs, and it fit her well, nipping in at her waist before falling in soft folds to her ankles. When she emerged from her room, she found Gabe waiting by the wagon, cleaned up and dressed in clothes that were actually his own, retrieved from the Patterson ranch the week before. He wore dark trousers, a white shirt and a vest, and his hair was combed back neatly. He looked so handsome that Natalie nearly forgot how to breathe. His reaction to seeing her was equally gratifying. His eyes widened, and he fumbled the harness he had been adjusting. "You look beautiful," he said, then immediately flushed. "I mean, you always look nice, but that dress, it is a good color on you." "Thank you," Natalie managed, pleased that she was not the only one feeling flustered. The ride into town was pleasant, the morning cool and clear. Nathan drove the wagon with old Pete beside him, while Gabe and Natalie sat in the back. Their hands lay on the wooden bench between them, so close that Natalie could feel the warmth of his skin without actually touching. Twice, the wagon hit a bump that jostled them together, and twice they sprang apart like guilty children. Apache Junction was busier than usual, the street crowded with ranch families in their Sunday best. Natalie waved to people she had known her whole life, introducing Gabe to those who asked. She noticed the speculative looks some of the older women gave them, the way Mrs. Henderson nudged her husband and whispered behind her hand. By tomorrow, half the town would be gossiping about Nathan Garrison's new hand and whether there was anything developing between him and Natalie. The church service itself was pleasant, the minister speaking about gratitude and community. Natalie tried to focus on the sermon, but she was acutely aware of Gabe sitting beside her in the pew, his arm occasionally brushing against hers as they stood for hymns. His voice, when he sang, was a warm baritone that blended nicely with her own alto. After the service, people gathered outside to socialize, and Natalie braced herself for the inevitable questions. But before anyone could corner her, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive suit approached their group. "Nathan," William Patterson said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone used to getting his way. "I was hoping to run into you." Natalie felt her father stiffen beside her. "Patterson, I wanted to make you another offer on your land," Patterson continued, as if they were discussing nothing more important than the weather. "I know we have not seen eye to eye in the past, but I am prepared to be generous. 75 cents on the dollar of your original purchase price." The insult of the offer hung in the air. Everyone within earshot knew that the Garrison Ranch, with its water rights and prime grazing land, was worth at least 3 times what Nathan had originally paid for it. "My answer is the same as it has been every other time you have asked," Nathan said evenly. "The ranch is not for sale." Patterson's smile thinned. "Nathan, be reasonable. You are behind on your mortgage payments. The bank is going to call in your loan any day now. At least this way you walk away with something." "How do you know about my mortgage?" Nathan demanded, his voice rising. "I own the bank," Patterson said simply. "As of last month, and I am not inclined to extend any more grace periods to people who owe me money." Natalie felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The bank had been their safety net, the one place her father had always been able to negotiate when times were hard. If Patterson owned it now, that option was gone. "That is illegal," Gabe said suddenly, stepping forward. "You cannot use your position as a creditor to force a sale at below market value." Patterson turned his attention to Gabe for the first time, his eyes narrowing. "Gabriel Vance. I heard you had defected to the losing side. How disappointing. I had high hopes for you." His tone made it clear exactly how low those hopes now were. "And as for legality, I suggest you learn the difference between what is illegal and what is simply good business." "There is nothing good about what you are doing," Gabe said flatly. "You are trying to steal a man's life work." A crowd had gathered now, people pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Patterson was aware of his audience and he played to it. "I am offering to buy property from a man who cannot afford to keep it. That is not theft, that is opportunity." He turned back to Nathan. "You have until the end of the month to accept my offer. After that, the bank will foreclose and you will get nothing." He walked away before Nathan could respond, leaving them standing in front of the church with everyone staring. Natalie wanted to sink into the ground. She could see the pity in people's eyes, the way they quickly looked away when she met their gazes. "Let us go home," Nathan said quietly. The ride back to the ranch was silent, the earlier pleasant atmosphere completely destroyed. Natalie could see the defeat in her father's shoulders, the way his hands gripped the reins too tightly. Old Pete looked furious, muttering curses under his breath about wealthy men and their greed. And Gabe's jaw was clenched so tight that Natalie worried he might crack a tooth. When they arrived home, Nathan unhitched the horses and headed straight for the barn without a word. Old Pete followed him, clearly intending to provide whatever support he could. That left Natalie and Gabe standing alone in the yard. "I am sorry," Gabe said finally. "If I had known Patterson was going to pull something like this, I would have said something sooner." "You knew he was capable of it," Natalie said. "It was not quite an accusation, but close." "I knew he was ruthless. I did not know he had bought the bank." Gabe ran his hands through his hair, destroying the careful combing from earlier. "There has to be something we can do, some way to fight this." "With what?" Natalie heard the bitterness in her own voice. "We have no money, no leverage. Patterson has made sure of that." "We have time," Gabe insisted. 3 weeks. We can sell the cattle early, pay down the mortgage enough that Patterson cannot foreclose." "The cattle are not ready," Natalie said. "They need at least another month of good grazing to bring a decent price. If we sell now, we will barely break even and we will have no stock for next year. Then we find another buyer for something else. The horses, equipment, whatever it takes." "And what happens next time?" Natalie asked, feeling tears sting her eyes. "What happens when we have sold everything we can sell and it is still not enough? Patterson will just wait us out. He has all the time and money in the world. We have neither." She turned away, not wanting Gabe to see her cry. But he caught her arm gently, the same way he had held onto her in the flood, and turned her back to face him. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "I am not going to let Patterson take this ranch. I am not going to let him win." "Why do you care so much?" Natalie asked through her tears. "This is not your fight. You could leave tomorrow, find work somewhere else, and never think about us again." "Is that really what you think?" Gabe asked, and there was hurt in his voice. "That I could just walk away from all of this, from your father and Pete and this ranch?" He paused, his grip tightening slightly on her arm. "From you?" Natalie looked up at him, seeing the intensity in his eyes, the determination in the set of his jaw. "Gabe, I am in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush as if he had been holding them back for too long. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I grabbed your arms in that flood and refused to let go. And every day since then, I have fallen a little more. The way you care for your father, the way you work so hard for this place, the way you laugh at Pete's stories even though you have heard them 100 times. The way you look in the morning light when you think no one is watching. All of it. Everything about you." Natalie could not breathe, could not think, could only stare at him as his words washed over her like a wave. I know I've got no right to say any of this, Gabe continued. I am just a hired hand with nothing to offer you. But I cannot stand by and watch you lose everything without at least letting you know that you are not alone, that whatever happens, I am here, and I am not going anywhere unless you tell me to leave. I do not want you to leave, Natalie whispered. Then I am staying, Gabe said simply. And we are going to find a way through this. How can you be so sure? Because I have to be, he said. Because the alternative is unacceptable. Before Natalie could second-guess herself, before fear could stop her, she stepped forward and kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a press of lips, but it felt like jumping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. When she pulled back, Gabe was staring at her with wonder. I am in love with you too, she said, the words feeling both terrifying and freeing. I have been trying not to be, because it seemed like the sensible thing to do, but I am tired of being sensible. Gabe laughed, a sound of pure joy, and pulled her into his arms properly. This time when he kissed her, there was nothing brief about it. It was deep and thorough and full of promise, and Natalie felt like she was drowning again, but in the best possible way. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gabe rested his forehead against hers. We are going to figure this out, he said again. Together. Together, Natalie agreed. And for the first time since Patterson's threat, she believed it might be possible. Over the next week, they worked like people possessed. Gabe rode into town and sent telegrams to every cattle buyer within 200 miles, trying to find someone willing to pay a premium for early delivery. Nathan and old Pete worked from dawn until dusk repairing every piece of equipment on the ranch, making everything as presentable as possible in case they needed to sell it. And Natalie pored over the account books, looking for any expense they could cut, any asset they had overlooked. In the evenings after the work was done and Nathan and Pete had retired, Gabe and Natalie would sit on the porch together, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. They discussed their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Gabe told her about growing up in Colorado, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the slow deterioration of his relationship with his father. Natalie shared memories of her mother, stories about growing up on the ranch, her fear that she would never be enough to save it. You are more than enough, Gabe told her one night, kissing her temple. You are everything. 10 days before Patterson's deadline, a telegram arrived that changed everything. One of the cattle buyers Gabe had contacted, a man named Marcus Reeves who supplied beef to the military forts throughout the territory, was willing to pay top dollar for immediate delivery. The catch was that he needed the cattle delivered to Fort Huachuca, a 90-mile drive through some of the roughest country in Arizona. It would take at least a week, maybe more, Nathan said, studying the telegram. And we would need to take every able-bodied person we have. We could not leave the ranch unguarded. I will stay, old Pete said immediately. I am too old for a cattle drive anyway, and someone needs to be here in case Patterson tries anything. It is risky, Nathan continued. But if we pull it off, we would make enough to pay off the entire mortgage with money left over to see us through the winter. Then we are doing it, Natalie said firmly. 3 days later, they set out with 60 head of cattle, everything they had that was ready to sell. Nathan rode point, with Gabe and Natalie flanking the herd. It was hard, dusty work, keeping the cattle moving in the right direction while watching for predators and hazards. They covered about 12 miles a day, stopping at night to make camp and take turns on watch. Despite the difficulties, Natalie found herself almost enjoying the drive. There was something freeing about being out under the open sky, away from the ranch and its problems. And having Gabe nearby, working alongside her, made even the hardest moments bearable. He was constantly checking on her, making sure she was drinking enough water, offering to take her watch shift so she could sleep. "I can pull my own weight," she told him on the third night, slightly exasperated. "I know you can," Gabe said, not looking offended. "That does not mean I am not going to worry about you." They were sitting by the fire, Nathan already asleep in his bedroll. The cattle were settled for the night, and the stars overhead were so bright they cast shadows. "My father likes you," Natalie said, changing the subject. "I like him too," Gabe replied. "He reminds me of what I hoped my own father would be." "Have you thought about contacting him? Your father, I mean." Gabe was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes, but I do not know what I would say. He made it clear that if I left, I should not bother coming back unless I was ready to do things his way." "Maybe he has changed his mind," Natalie suggested gently. "Maybe he misses you." "Maybe," Gabe said, but he did not sound convinced. "Or maybe some breaks are permanent." He reached over and took her hand. "But I am learning that losing one family can mean finding another." Natalie squeezed his fingers, understanding. "So you are saying we are stuck with you?" "Afraid so," Gabe said, smiling. "Unless you are planning to get rid of me." "Not likely," Natalie said. "You are too useful." "Useful," Gabe repeated, his smile widening. "That is romantic." "Fine. You are moderately attractive and occasionally charming. Occasionally, very occasionally." Gabe laughed and pulled her closer, kissing her soundly. When they broke apart, Natalie glanced over to make sure her father was still asleep. He was, or at least he was pretending to be, which was almost the same thing. On the 6th day of the drive, they ran into trouble. A group of riders appeared on the horizon, and Nathan's face went tight with recognition. "That is Patterson's men," he said grimly. "6 of them." "What are they doing out here?" Natalie asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. "Nothing good," Gabe said, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. The riders approached at an easy lope, spreading out to surround them. Their leader was a hard-faced man with a scar running down his left cheek. Natalie recognized him as Patterson's foreman, a man named Jack Sutton who had a reputation for doing his boss's dirty work without asking questions. "That is a nice herd you have got there, Garrison," Sutton called out. "Shame about you driving them through Patterson land without permission." "This is not Patterson land," Nathan said evenly. "This is open range." "Not anymore," Sutton replied, pulling a piece of paper from his vest. "Mr. Patterson just bought this section from the territorial government. As of 3 days ago, you are trespassing." It was a lie, it had to be. But Natalie could see the calculation in her father's eyes, weighing whether it was worth calling their bluff. They were outnumbered, tired from days on the trail and still miles from Fort Huachuca. If it came to a fight, they would lose. "What does Patterson want?" Nathan asked finally. "He wants you to turn those cattle around and go home," Sutton said. "He figures if you cannot deliver them to Fort Huachuca, you cannot pay off your mortgage and the bank forecloses right on schedule." "You cannot stop us," Gabe said. "We have a legal right to move our own cattle." "We are not stopping you," Sutton said, his smile cold. "We are just exercising our right to deny access to our property. You are welcome to find another route. Should only add a week or 2 to your journey. Of course by then your deadline will be long past." Natalie felt rage building in her chest. This was exactly the kind of underhanded tactic Patterson would use, finding a way to stop them without technically breaking any laws. She looked at her father, seeing the frustration and defeat warring on his face. "There has got to be another way," she said. "There is," Gabe said suddenly. "We go through Patterson's men." Everyone turned to stare at him. "That is crazy," Nathan said. "We would never make it." "We would if we stampede the herd," Gabe insisted. "They are not expecting it. We could break through before they realize what is happening." Someone could get killed, Natalie protested. Someone will definitely lose everything if we do not try, Gabe countered. He looked at Nathan. It is your call, sir, but I think this is our only shot. Nathan was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from the cattle to Patterson's men to his daughter. Finally, he nodded. We do it. But Natalie, you stay back if things go wrong. Absolutely not, Natalie interrupted. You need all the help you can get, and I am as good a rider as either of you. Natalie. She is right, Gabe said quietly. We need her. Nathan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with resignation. Fine, but you stay on the outside of the herd. If things get dangerous, you run. Promise me. I promise, Natalie lied. Knowing she would do no such thing if it came down to it, they took their positions, spreading out around the cattle. Sutton and his men were watching them warily now, sensing something was about to happen. Natalie's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Her hands were slick with sweat on the reins. On my signal, Nathan called out. Then he let loose with a piercing whistle and fired his pistol into the air. The cattle, already nervous from days on the trail, exploded into motion. 60 head of beef, each weighing nearly 1,000 pounds, surged forward as one. Natalie kicked her horse into a gallop, yelling and waving her hat to keep the herd moving. Beside her, she could see Gabe doing the same, his face set with determination. Patterson's men scattered, clearly not having expected such a bold move. 2 of them were nearly trampled as they scrambled to get out of the way. Sutton was shouting orders that no one could hear over the thunder of hooves. And then they were through, the herd running flat out across the desert with Nathan, Gabe, and Natalie riding hard to keep them together. They ran for nearly 2 miles before the cattle started to tire and slow. By then, Patterson's men were far behind, and Natalie allowed herself a whoop of victory. Gabe looked over at her and grinned, his face streaked with dust and sweat, and she had never found anyone more attractive in her life. That was insane, Nathan said when they finally got the herd under control, but he was smiling too, broader than Natalie had seen him smile in years. Absolutely insane. But it worked, Gabe pointed out. It worked, Nathan agreed. He looked at both of them, his expression softening. You two make a good team. The best, Gabe said, his eyes on Natalie. They made it to Fort Huachuca 2 days later, tired and sore but triumphant. Marcus Reeves was as good as his word, paying them the agreed-upon price without haggling. It was more money than Natalie had ever seen in one place, enough to not just pay off their mortgage, but to give them a comfortable cushion for the winter months ahead. The ride back to the ranch was much faster without the cattle to slow them down. They arrived 3 days before Patterson's deadline to find old Pete sitting on the porch with a rifle across his knees and a satisfied expression on his weathered face. Was starting to worry about you folks, he said. But I see you still got all your parts attached, so I guess things went all right. Better than all right, Nathan said, dismounting and clasping the old man's shoulder. We did it, Pete. We are going to keep the ranch. The next morning, Nathan, Gabe, and Natalie rode into Apache Junction together. They went straight to the bank, where Patterson was in his office, clearly not expecting them. When Nathan laid the cash on his desk, enough to pay off the entire mortgage with interest, Patterson's face went through several interesting shades of red and purple. This is impossible, he sputtered. You could not have sold those cattle, my men. Your men tried to stop us, Gabe said calmly. They failed. Now, if you would kindly provide us with the paperwork showing the mortgage is paid in full. Patterson looked like he wanted to refuse, but there were witnesses in the bank, people who had heard Nathan's request. To deny it now would be too blatant even for him. With shaking hands, he filled out the necessary documents and stamped them with the bank's seal. "This is not over," he said as they were leaving. "Yes, it is," Nathan replied. "Unless you want everyone in this town to know exactly how you tried to cheat me out of my land, how you used your position at the bank to manipulate me, how you sent your men to illegally stop a legal cattle drive. I am sure the territorial governor would be very interested in hearing all about it." Patterson's face went pale. Without another word, Nathan, Gabe, and Natalie walked out of the bank and into the bright Arizona sunshine. "Did we really just win?" Natalie asked, still hardly able to believe it. "We really just won," Gabe confirmed, sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around right there on Main Street, not caring who saw. When he set her down, she was breathless and laughing, and her father was shaking his head with amusement. "You two are going to give this town enough gossip to last through Christmas," Nathan observed. "Let them talk," Natalie said recklessly, still giddy with victory and relief. "Actually, if they are going to talk anyway," Gabe said, suddenly looking nervous. He glanced at Nathan. "Sir, there is something I want to ask you." Nathan's expression shifted to something knowing and warm. "I think I know what it is, and you have my blessing." Gabe's face lit up. Then he turned to Natalie, and to her shock, he dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the street. "Natalie Garrison, I know I do not have much to offer you except a strong back and a willingness to work until my hands bleed. I know we have only known each other for 2 months, and by all rights, you should probably tell me I am crazy. But I love you more than I have ever loved anything in my life, and I promise that if you marry me, I will spend every day trying to make you happy. So what do you say? Will you take a chance on me?" Natalie looked down at him, at this man who had grabbed her arms and refused to let go, who had given up a paying job to help save her family's ranch, who had stampeded a herd of cattle through Patterson's men without hesitation. This man who looked at her like she was the sun and the moon and all the stars combined. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with happy tears. "Yes, of course, yes." Gabe surged to his feet and kissed her, and this time Natalie did not care at all that half the town was watching. Let them see. Let them know that the Garrison family was not just surviving, they were thriving, and they had found someone who would fight alongside them no matter what came. The wedding was held 6 weeks later on a perfect October morning. The whole town turned out, partly because everyone loved a good wedding and partly because everyone wanted to see exactly how the story of the cowboy and the ranch girl would end. They were married in the same church where Patterson had tried to force Nathan to sell, and Natalie took a certain satisfaction in that. She wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her. Gabe wore a new suit, paid for with his share of the cattle money that Nathan had insisted he take despite his protests. Old Pete stood as Gabe's best man, his eyes suspiciously wet throughout the ceremony. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Gabe kissed his bride, the whole church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed everyone who came. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and soon there was music and dancing. Natalie danced with her father, who whispered that her mother would have loved Gabe. She danced with old Pete, who told her she looked beautiful and that he expected to be godfather to all her babies. And she danced with her husband, still marveling at the fact that she could call him that, this man who was now hers and she was his. "Happy?" Gabe asked, holding her close as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I have ever been," Natalie said honestly. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this was all a dream." "If it is, I am having the same dream," Gabe said, "and I never want to wake up." Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Gabe was no longer the hired hand but a full partner in the ranch, his name added to the deed alongside Nathan's and Natalie's. They worked together through that winter and into the spring, building up the herd again, making improvements to the property, slowly transforming the struggling operation into something prosperous. Patterson tried one more time to cause trouble, spreading rumors about the quality of their cattle, but word had gotten around about what he had done, and people were no longer willing to trust him. His influence in Apache Junction waned, and eventually he sold his holdings and moved back to California, much to everyone's relief. In late summer, nearly a year after Gabe had pulled Natalie from the rushing mud, she realized she was pregnant. She told Gabe one evening as they sat on their favorite spot on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and red. "Are you sure?" he asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "Pretty sure," Natalie said, smiling at his expression. "How do you feel about being a father?" "Terrified," Gabe admitted. Then he grinned. "And absolutely thrilled." He placed his hand gently on her stomach, even though there was nothing to feel yet. "We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," Natalie confirmed, covering his hand with hers. Their son was born the following spring, healthy and loud and perfect. They named him Thomas William Vance, after both his grandfathers, though they called him Tommy. Nathan was besotted with his grandson, spending hours just holding the baby and telling him stories. Old Pete declared himself the official godfather and threatened anyone who tried to dispute his claim. And Gabe was the kind of father Natalie had always hoped he would be. Patient and gentle, willing to wake up for midnight feedings, content to walk the floor with a fussy baby while Natalie got some rest. He sang to Tommy old cowboy songs and lullabies his own mother had sung to him. He made toys with his own hands, carving wooden horses and cattle. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Grace Catherine, named for both her grandmothers. She had Natalie's green eyes and Gabe's dark hair, and she was fearless from the day she could walk, following her father and brother around the ranch and insisting on helping with chores as soon as she was old enough. Old Pete lived to see both children grow into school age, passing away peacefully in his sleep one winter night at the age of 81. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Natalie planted wildflowers on his grave every spring. He had been family in every way that mattered, and they missed him terribly. But life went on, as it always does. The ranch continued to prosper under their management. Tommy grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's head for figures. Grace was more interested in the business side of things, already negotiating better prices with buyers by the time she was 12. Nathan lived to be 76, long enough to see his grandchildren grown and to dance at Tommy's wedding. He died with Natalie and Gabe at his bedside, his last words a benediction. "You saved us all, son. When you grabbed my daughter's arms and would not let go, you saved us all." The years turned, bringing changes and challenges, joy and sorrow, all the things that make up a life. But through it all, Gabe and Natalie faced everything together, just as they had that day in the rushing mud. They grew old together, their hands still finding each other across the dinner table, their love deepening with each passing season. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Gabe stood to make a toast. His hair was white now, his face lined with the evidence of decades spent under the Arizona sun. But his eyes were still that same intense blue, and when he looked at Natalie, she saw the same love that had been there from the beginning. 50 years ago, I grabbed onto this woman and refused to let go, he said, his voice still strong despite his years. It was the smartest thing I ever did. She has been my partner, my best friend, my love, and my whole world, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. He raised his glass. To Natalie, who took a chance on a drifter cowboy and made him the luckiest man alive. To Natalie, everyone echoed, and she wiped happy tears from her eyes. That night, after everyone had gone home and the ranch was quiet, Gabe and Natalie sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the decades. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and eternal, and in the distance, they could hear the cattle settling in for the night. "Do you ever think about that day?" Natalie asked, taking his hand. "The day we met, every single day," Gabe said. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I even knew you. How different everything would have been if I had been 5 minutes later, or if I had ridden past without hearing you call for help. But you did not," Natalie said, squeezing his fingers. "You heard me and you came and you held on." "And I am never letting go," Gabe promised. The same promise he had made 50 years ago, the promise he had kept through floods and drought, through prosperity and hardship, through all the beautiful, messy, wonderful chaos of a life built together. "I am counting on it," Natalie said, and she leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, knowing that this, right here, was exactly where she was meant to be. They had built something remarkable together, not just a successful ranch but a legacy of love, family, and determination. Their children would carry on what they had started, and their children after them, all of it tracing back to a single moment when a cowboy grabbed a woman's arms and refused to let the rushing mud take her. It was a good story, Natalie thought. The best kind of story, the kind with a happy ending. And as the moon rose over the desert, casting silver light across the land they had fought so hard to keep, Gabe and Natalie sat together in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined, their hearts still beating as one. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful and secure, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they refused to give up on each other or the life they had built together. The wind whispered through the mesquite trees, carrying with it the scent of sage and possibility. In the barn, a horse whinnied softly. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon, and on the porch of the house that love built, two people who had started as strangers and become everything to each other watched the stars come out and knew that they had lived a life worth living together.